This is the 5-minute guide to the USS Missouri, an Iowa-class battleship of the United States Navy.
And so we're back to the Iowa class for this week's special. Missouri is the subject of this week, and Wisconsin is the only one left, so no prizes for guessing what the next Iowa class special will be. Anyway, the Missouri was the third Iowa class battleship to be laid down, although as luck would have it, she would actually be the last battleship that the United States would ever commission. So, with hull number BB63 and Wisconsin having BB64, you might think, well, hang on a minute, shouldn't Wisconsin come after Missouri? Well, yes, that's true. Wisconsin was laid down a couple of weeks after Missouri in January 1941, but due to various circumstances in the shipyards, the Missouri would launch about 2 months after Wisconsin and would commission similarly about 2 months afterwards, thereby making it the last one, since Illinois and Kentucky were not commissioned. The Missouri arrived somewhat late in the Second World War, commissioning on the 11th of June 1944, and as such she didn't need any refits to bring her anti-aircraft armament to the full classic American flavour. As with all other Iowa class, her 9 16-inch guns were contained in 3 triple turrets, 2 forward and 1 aft, and a secondary battery of 25-inch guns in twin turrets was arranged on either side of the superstructure. Her anti-aircraft armament consisted of no less than 80 40mm Bofors guns and 49 20mm guns in a variety of quad, twin and single mounts. Both Missouri and Wisconsin were slightly different from Iowa and New Jersey, with a variety of minor structural improvements made during their construction, the main one of which being that the traverse bulkhead which protected the ship from end-on fire was increased to 14.5 inches thick compared to the 11.3 inches on the first 2 ships. Due to shakedown trials and needing to transit across to the Pacific, she actually only officially joined the war in January 1945, becoming part of Task Force 58. Although she didn't hang around for very long after that, getting immediately stuck in with a February raid against Japan, this being the first naval airstrike against Japan since the Doolittle raid from the carrier Hornet in 1942. And from there, it was straight over to Iwo Jima for that classic late-war American battleship occupation of shore bombardment. A variety of raids interspersed this activity, so along with the bombardment of Okinawa, it also covered the withdrawal of the damaged carrier Franklin and withstood quite a number of kamikaze attacks, although 1 or 2 kamikazes did get a little bit lucky and hit home without inflicting that much damage to the battleship. Although, amusingly, she did manage to temporarily lose the use of one of her 40mm Bofors guns, since the machine gun, or one of the machine guns from the Japanese kamikaze, actually got stuck in the barrel. By May, she was flagship of the Third Fleet as the American noose tightened around Japan in preparation for Operation Downfall, which were to be the landings on Japan that would have surpassed D-Day by a significant margin, and fortunately didn't occur due to the atomic bombings. Instead, the Missouri would find itself sailing into Tokyo Bay to witness the surrender of the Japanese Empire to the Allied forces, with the surrender itself taking place on the Missouri's deck. Her role as flagship of the Third Fleet would then come to an end, being transferred to the battleship South Dakota, as the Missouri, being the much larger and faster ship, was almost immediately called into Operation Magic Carpet to take soldiers back home. After that brief career in the Second World War, the Missouri found herself back at home, taking part in various Navy Day celebrations, when the US Navy conducted something like the British Spithead Naval Review, except instead of having multiple rows of ships, they just went for one 7-mile-long line of ships. Although from this photo they probably could have used a little bit more help defining exactly what a line was. Unlike her sister ships, the Missouri was not put into reserve after the Second World War, and so embarked on a series of missions, including some visits to the Mediterranean, as well as exercises in the North Atlantic, where some idiot accidentally shot her with a star shell, although fortunately not causing any injuries. She would also be involved in a number of technological tests, including the first operation of helicopters from a battleship. You can see here one of them finding its natural home perched on top of one of the main battery turrets. In 1950, she was heading out on a training mission in the Hampton Roads when she managed to run aground. As she weighs a fair bit and was proceeding at some speed, she stuck pretty hard and fast, which immediately prompted a flood of tugboats trying to free her. They tried numerous methods to get her off, including, as you can see here, a group hug, but whilst the power of love may be a curious thing, it does not in fact move battleships. However, after 4 tries, the rather more practical power of multiple heavy-duty tugboats did eventually manage to shift the ship back into open water. This was just as well as later in the year the Korean War broke out, and as the US Navy's only active battleship, the Missouri was promptly sent across the Pacific to help in the United Nations war effort. She would then spend the next 3 years shooting up targets in North Korea, first the North Koreans themselves, and then later some of the several 100,000 Chinese troops that came in to help their allies. These were fairly successful at destroying a number of enemy supply lines, and can best be summed up thusly.
Boom, 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 boom. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, boom, boom. How did you guess, sir?
After a refit lasting from late 1953 to early 1954, she was scheduled to be placed into the reserve with the end of the Korean War, but there was just enough time to organise the one and only time when the 4 Iowa class would actually sail together. Following the conclusion of this particular training course, she was brought back into dock and decommissioned in February 1955 as part of the Pacific Reserve Fleet. As the ship where the Japanese had surrendered, thus ending World War II, she was quite a popular tourist attraction despite being in reserve, with a lot of people visiting, around 180,000 visitors per year. Whilst some of the Iowa class would be reactivated for the war in Vietnam, after the Korean War the Missouri would spend nearly 30 years quite happily sitting in the reserve fleet and growing a small cottage industry around her mooring. But as 1984 rolled round and the Reagan administration determined that the US should have a 600-ship navy, the Missouri was reactivated. Her 20mm and 40mm anti-aircraft guns were removed since they were basically obsolete for modern warfare, and 4 of her 10 5-inch turrets were also removed. In their place came 4 quad launchers for Harpoon missiles, 8 box launchers for 32 Tomahawk cruise missiles, and 4 Phalanx close-in weapon systems for defense against anti-ship missiles and enemy aircraft at close range. New radar and electronic warfare capabilities were added as well. And of course, most importantly, the ship's bell, which had been removed and placed in a museum, was brought back so that the ship could sound out watches and other important activities whilst it was on commission. The ship would be formally recommissioned in May 1986, a relatively good year if I may say so myself. This ceremony was attended by Margaret Truman, who'd actually been the person to christen the ship back in 1943. She would then take part in a vast number of exercises in both oceans, accompanying supply ships, modern frigates and destroyers, modern aircraft carriers, and, as can be seen here, also modern cruisers. Please pay attention, naval designers. On the right is how to design a proper ship superstructure. On the left, well, that's just a box, isn't it? Go home, try again. As it turned out, the mimetic properties of American battleships to attract lots and lots of small-caliber weapons to themselves could not be ignored for long, and in 1987 the Missouri was given a bunch of 40mm grenade launchers and 25mm chain guns, ostensibly to help with operations in the Persian Gulf during the Iraq-Iran War, since apparently it was considered poor sport to use a 16-inch high-explosive shell on a small, fast attack boat. A number of Pacific wargaming exercises would round out her service in the 1980s, and in 1990 Iraq would invade Kuwait. Clearly her sailing off into the Pacific had persuaded the locals that it was time to start some military hijinks, and Missouri was sent straight back. Arriving on station towards the end of 1990, she would open her part in the hostilities with the launch of 28 Tomahawk cruise missiles in January 1991. She would then work her way in close to the shore and open fire on Iraqi positions with her main battery guns, carrying on in this role until relieved by her sister ship USS Wisconsin. Whilst the Iraqis were fairly bad at noticing things like entire American tank divisions, even they couldn't fail to notice a 16-inch naval gun bombardment and returned fire with a pair of Silkworm missiles, one of which missed, quite happily. The other one was actually heading straight for Missouri, but fortunately the British destroyer HMS Gloucester was in attendance as escort and intercepted the missile using its own Sea Dart surface-to-air system. In somewhat murky circumstances, Missouri would then become the victim of a minor friendly fire incident when the Perry-class frigate Jarrett somehow let off several rounds from its onboard CIWS, a few of which made their way over to the Missouri and poked a few holes in the superstructure. A rather unorthodox mission as a gigantic minesweeper would round out her service in the Gulf War. But with all the excitement over and the USSR collapsing, there was no longer a need for a 600-ship navy, and in March 1992, the Missouri was decommissioned after 16 years of active service. After a few years in the reserve, the US Navy decided they wanted a museum ship in Hawaii to match the USS Arizona Memorial, bracketing the start and the end of the Second World War, and so by 1999, the Missouri was a museum ship in Hawaii. And that's where she's been ever since, open to visit if you happen to be in the area. She has a total of 11 battle stars, and if you believe modern films, is also capable of repelling an alien invasion.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to tag your question with Q&A if you want to leave a question for the dry dock.